Oh Lord. Okay, well, we'll do our best. Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted episode 13. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden, and if I sound a little more profound than usual, it's because I think I have COVID and my voice is misbehaving, but otherwise, the rest of me is still here.
Yeah, forgive some coughs and sneezes. As Mark said, as we met, welcome to the doctor's waiting room. We've got Gavin sneezing, we've got me coughing, but we'd persevere. We're recording this on the 29th of December, and the news that Pope Benedict is unwell. We don't know what the situation will be when this airs. So if we discuss Pope Benedict, which we hope to a little later on, just understand the context that we're discussing this while the news is that he's unwell, and we continue to pray for him. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of news, and we've also been paying attention to the things that you've been writing in the comments, and people have asked us to make comments about Father Frank Pavone, who's been laicised, and also Father Rupnik. Diane Montagna, she's written about this for the Catholic Herald. She interviewed Father Gerald Murray, didn't she, Mark? And she's been writing about what's happened with Father Rupnik and those allegations. Father Frank Pavone has been laicised. There's also been the news that Cardinal Ladaria, who, along with Cardinal Ulay, had criticised the German synodal way, has not had, his position has not been renewed. So there's something to say about that. And then, as I said, if we have time, also we'll try and say something about dear Pope Benedict, who is unwell. I say and that isn't the last thing, because also what's come to our attention, and you're in France as we record this, Gavin, is that over the Christmas period, some churches have been vandalised in France. So perhaps you might speak about that. But I'll go over to you, Mark, first, and say, what can you tell us to begin? Because people have been asking us to comment on Father Frank Pavone. What do you know about what's happened? Why has he been laicised?
Oh, it is quite interesting. I think basically it comes down to an authority issue, that he's not done what his bishop has told him, and his bishop has told him to give up his ministry, which is a pro-life apostolate called Priest for Life. And Pavone is one of the foremost pro-life advocates in the USA across the spectrum, religious spectrum. And his apostolate raises about $10 million a year. So it's a massive thing. And his bishop has basically asked him to come back to Amarillo and take up a role as a parish priest. And, you know, Pavone has been asked to do what he does. He's been asked by bishops and supported by the Vatican previously. So I think he feels very justified in, you know, sort of, it's like, okay, so we've got a situation where, you know, regular listeners know that I've got a very low opinion of British bishops as in general. Now, in America, things are much worse, people. There are one or two sort of shining stars, but basically, I think where our lot are useless, there you've got some real dangerous corruption going on in the US. And they do like to keep it all in a sort of a boys' club. So, you know, I'd be really, really skeptical about this bishop having, like, you know, not really. I think he's just bullying Pavone because he's got the power over him. And he's, you know, he doesn't like him. He doesn't like what he's doing. You've got this whole dynamic going on in America at the moment where you've got the pro-life cause front and center because the Pope has received Pelosi and Biden in the Vatican and given them Holy Communion, where you've got, like, Pelosi's bishop has basically said that she can't go forward for Holy Communion. So basically you've got, like, and we can link it in with what we were talking about, that interview with the Jesuit magazine, America, where the Pope spoke about the politicization of the faith and was basically trying to say, you know, that we pastors have to be pastors and can't get involved in politics, and, you know, which frankly, is nonsense when you've got people like Biden who are doing, claiming to be Catholic. So he's using his relationship with Pope Francis. He's using his Catholicism to say, look, you can be like me, you can support abortion, you can support homosexual relationships, you can support drag queens and transgender ideology, and the Pope will receive you and everything's fine. And so, I mean, really, the Pope is politicizing the issues, it seems to me, by taking that sort of stance.
But Father Frank Pavone publicly supported Trump, didn't he? Was that one of the things that?
Well, and I'd say that was probably one of the key reasons why, because and you can link that, as I say, with that America magazine thing where he was saying that pastors shouldn't be. And I think canon law states that you can't get involved with a political party without your bishop's permission. Now, I don't know what the situation there was with, with his bishop, but so like if we move the story onto the Rupnik, and show the cross reference with Rupnik, then you've got a situation where with Pavone, this is someone who is really highly respected, has brought, hundreds, thousands of people to Christ. He's doing amazing work, saving children's lives. Yeah, there's some controversial stuff there, but are you saying we couldn't have a conversation and sort those issues out, that he has to be laicized? And then you've got this other bloke who has been excommunicated for abusing the load of nuns. The nuns are all writing letters to the Vatican. The Vatican's ignoring it. He's given absolution to one of the nuns that he's been in a relationship with in the confessional, which is canonically excommunicable. So he's been excommunicated, and it's reserved to the Holy See. So the Holy See knows about it. Who has overturned his excommunication? It can't be the head of the DDF, Lardaria, because he's the one who did it. It can't be Sousa, the head of the Jesuit order, because he's given an interview to the Associated Press saying, basically, weren't me, Gov, but the Pope did know all about it. So are we, that even after this all happened, the Pope had him to give a Lenten address because Cantalamessa was unwell or something. So he's carried on with his ministry, basically, and it's more and more is coming out. He's been given commissions, and but he shouldn't be doing any of these things according to his own order. So who is allowing him? I suppose you could draw a parallel with, like, this guy has actually done something wrong, he's been sentenced, if you like, sentence has been passed on him. You've got Pavone, where you haven't got that situation. You've got, all right, we might find some of the things that he's done a bit of a challenge, but really, is that a cause to sort of end his ministry and remove him from the priesthood, when you've got people like Rupnik who seem to be able to get away with anything? But it's all about who you know, not what you know, isn't it? I suppose.
Well, I was going to say that there are two ways of judging it. One's spiritual and one's political. I think spiritually, Mark's made a very good case for Pavone and against Rupnik. But of course, politically, Pavone had friends around Francis arguing for him and arguing for him to be to have an appeal. And so it's always possible the Pope may change his mind. It looks as though Pavone lost the political fight. His opponents were quicker to get to the Pope than he was. But I think it looks it looks extremely bad. And a lot of people have said to me, this is the biggest scandal of the whole papacy at the moment. And one of the reasons why Pavone's situation was leaked was because it would distract some people into talking about Pavone and away from Rupnik. And certainly that's what's happened. And since it has been leaked, it was deliberately done. The timing was engineered. One's at least entitled to think of that. I mean, I've got a lot of friends who say, how can you be a Catholic with so much scandal? And the answer is that there are always bad people in the church. The church is But in the same way, Islam is half political and half theological. The church is a political organization, and people fight and lose political battles. But you ought to be able to say, sorry, I'm still hoping that Pavone, who's a very difficult man, I mean, I love him. I was really impressed with him. I can see that most bishop, unless they had the humility of a saint, would find him very, very difficult to work with. And I can see why he's provoked the people to the point where they wanted to slap him down terminally. But God bless him, he's saved so many lives. You know, the trouble is sometimes the church makes allowances. Poor St. Francis almost didn't make it. He almost was slapped down in the way Pavone was. It was a great grace that he made it through to be embraced by the church. So I think we have to be grateful for all that Pavone has done, recognise that there's some political shenanigans and hope that they can be reversed. But most importantly, not give up the pressure for Rupnik to be accountable and for the people who are responsible, to whom he's responsible in Rome, to take some kind of action, because they owe it to the nuns. They owe it to the whole Catholic community worldwide to say this is wholly and completely at odds with our faith and unacceptable. And there has to be some kind of repentance or accountability.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's the key thing, is that we need all this talk about zero tolerance and one thing and another. And, you know, it just seems obvious that they're not really interested in it. It's just jobs for the boys, you know, and if you grease the right palms, whatever. Rupnik apparently is a close friend of Pope Francis and an advisor. And so, it seems to be that he can get away with almost anything. And that's unacceptable for us as Christians. You know, we need to do better.
Yeah. So the question, why is Father Frank Pavone dealt with so severely for, yes, you can see maybe there's things that are difficult or questionable, but when you've got someone like Father Rupnik, who so clearly, well, as far as I can tell, these accusations of abuse are so clearly require a firm hand, and he hasn't been dealt with firmly. So I don't know. I don't know the answer as to why that's happened, but
one rule for one and another rule for the other, isn't it?
Interesting that it has. So yeah. Oh, was that a cough or a sneeze?
Yeah, there was a cough. Yeah,
yeah. It was a cough.
It's my mortality making itself heard. No.
So then the other piece of news is that last time we met, I think it was on 12, we spoke about, or it might have been 11, we spoke about Cardinals Ladaria and Ulay, who had criticised the German synodal way, put up a brick wall and said, no, this is not acceptable. And now Cardinal Ladaria, whose term is due for renewal, has been told that it won't be renewed. What do you know about that?
Well, it's tied up with this. So the breaking news, and like people say, well, what's the source of this news or whatever? But there was this news story circulating around the end of December that basically this guy, Heiner Wilmer, who's a German progressive, who's on the real progressive wing of the German Bishops' Conference. So he's in favour of everything that the synodal way is working to push forward in the church, has basically been fingered by Pope Francis as being the man who's going to replace Ladaria. And Ladaria hasn't had his term of office extended, so that everyone takes that as a sign that basically he's looking for someone new. And it came out, so lots of people were citing their Vatican sources, and people, even really serious people like George Weigel wrote in Catholic World Report about this. So it's not just gossip, it's not hearsay, it's definitely something that was out there. So it got out there somehow. And everyone was, Weigel's piece must be read, I think, because he lays it on the line clearly. Like, what if the Pope doesn't understand that this is just, the blatant destruction of everything, then someone needs to tell him urgently, And then it seems that someone did tell him, because that appointment wasn't made. And then there's an article that came out, and you can read it on my blog. I've got a blog about it that's absolutely gone viral, and I've got the link on there to the Catholic German Catholic news source, but they're basically saying that it's down to Muller, really interestingly. So Muller obviously was head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which Pope Francis has downgraded to the dicastery of the Doctrine of the Faith, and Laidaria has taken over. So he got rid of Muller, who was a Ratzingerian. That was the way he was seen. And he's got this new guy who's a Jesuit. So I immediately think, Jesuit tricks, you know, they're up to something here. But Laidaria, fair play to him, where as far as the German Synodal Way, as we said in the previous episode, read what he said, read what Ule said. It is properly Catholic, you know, it's really encouraging stuff. So they've gone against the German Synodal Way. And Francis wasn't there. He absconded from the meeting, from the ad limina meeting, and chose not to attend. And this is typical Pope Francis, as far as I'm concerned. It's all smoke and mirrors. Why he can't just be, you know, open and honest about what's going on, I just have no idea. But, you know, all we're left with was Ule and Laidaria coming out and saying to the Germans, look, you've misunderstood basically everything. You've misunderstood Catholicism, is how the whole thing read, the reports read. And they have. It was absolutely brilliant. You know, you want to be something completely different. You don't want to be Catholic. You want to be something else. So, you know, you can't do that from within the church. And it's not, most importantly, I think one of the things that was said was that it's not fair on the people who, you know, you represent as bishops, that you've got a responsibility towards, to be pushing these false ideas. So I think this is absolutely pivotal, because if at the time I was like, right, well, that's it then, brilliant, Francis isn't the heretic that, you know, we've been worried that he is, and you know, that might be a radical thing to say on the show, but we have got Pachamama and, you know, Amoris Laetitia. You could line up the problems with the Francis pontificate, and then you can make all excuses and all that sort of thing. But taken as a whole, along with the corruption, along with the promotion of Zanchetta and Grassi, and now we've got Rupnik, and, you know, like, it's just ongoing, not to mention the financial scandals that still haven't been sorted out. And like, you know, Gavin and I were saying earlier, this is you know, surely one of the most important issues of the Francis pontificate, but it still hasn't been sorted. And there's the trial of the century going on in Rome at the moment. And yet, you know, you just have to wonder if he chooses this progressive bishop for the head of the DDF. Well, we all know then, don't we? There can be no hiding from it, you know. So the chat out there at the moment is that he hasn't done it yet. You know, that there's been a group of cardinals who've gone to him and said, Holy Father. And that is, I think that's the way it should be. It should be. He shouldn't be able to just he is the supreme authority in the church, but he shouldn't be able to, that's not what the magisterium means. That's not what the papacy is. The papacy echoes, you know, the word of God. It's to explain the word of God and to be, you know, read Dei Verbum 10, you know, for example. That tells you exactly what the role of it is. And it's not to make up anything new. It's to be faithful to the deposit of faith and explain it in each new generation and age. So I think very important developments, and we wait with bated breath to see what happens.
Watch this space. Yeah. Okay, Gavin?
Well, I'd just like to pull together Pope Benedict, the Catholic Herald, Mohammed, and the Pope's Regensburg address in one very brief synopsis. Last week, I'll give you the haiku version. So last week I got into, well, not trouble exactly, but I wrote a fairly provocative piece criticizing King Charles's Christmas speech, because it was written from an interfaith point of view, and I suggested that he wrote it as an outsider to Christianity rather than an insider, and it suited very well the zeitgeist. People were very pleased with it. It was very carefully crafted. But I thought in the end it would cause trouble, because you can only either be for Christ or against him. And if you're not going to be for him in this case, then you'll end up being against him. And the headlines today, I think, have proved me right. You may remember that the Pope's Regensburg address, which was 2005, got him into trouble because he quoted a Byzantine emperor's attitude about Muhammad, which wasn't very well informed and wasn't very flattering. And people, Muslims the world over, didn't read the text, but assumed that this was the Pope's personal view, not understanding he was quoting in a text.
Yeah.
And in a way, this, if you like, proves the difficulty we have dealing with Islam. And something very similar has happened with the headlines today about Prevent, where it turns out that the people charged with de-radicalizing young Muslims have actually been radicalizing them, or at least have been using taxpayers' money, millions of pounds, to give grants to organizations that want to set up an Islamic terrorist fifth column in the British Army. And it's all in the Telegraph this morning. It's been extraordinary. And the reason for mentioning this is not to score political points, but to say that Islam is very ambitious when it comes to playing a role in any society that it's in. We were asked to talk about, at the same time, the fact that over 1,000 churches a year are torched in France. And some people think that Notre Dame was not a mistake, but it was a piece of arson. But whether Notre Dame was part of it or not, nonetheless, 1,000 churches get seriously burnt down. And it's very hard to think of them being burnt down by anybody else, apart from people who don't like churches and what they stand for. So it's true the radical left in France have been cutting off priests' heads and killing nuns in the revolution. The radical French left hates the church, but it hasn't been burning down churches. It's just one of the things it hasn't done. And the assumption is, therefore, that Muslims are doing it. And it seems quite likely that they are. So what we're finding ourselves with, again, is the fact that Muslims appear to be much more dedicated to Muhammad than Christians are to Jesus. And the question I think we have to face today is, as we negotiate the way in which we build society in the next decade or so with Muslims, we have to do it by being faithful to Jesus and saying, actually, interfaith and relativism don't work. You can't have interfaith when you have two monolithic cultures that say we are right. We are absolutely right. I mean, Jesus is not possibly the way, the truth, and the life for some. He is the way, the truth, and the life. And Muhammad's claims for the Quran are absolute. So if you think, which is why, of course, Rushdie got in such trouble with the satanic verses, because there's a point where Muhammad himself wasn't entirely sure that the angel Gabriel who was talking to him was indeed the angel Gabriel, and wondered if it might be Satan. So the very question that Muhammad asks himself is a question that Christians also ask. To what extent were you misled at all? Is the Quran a mixture of inspired and perverted text? It's a question that has to be asked, but only by facing the questions, only by facing the claims of Jesus and facing the claims of the Quran, can you build a society based on mutual understanding. If you pretend it's all the same, whilst meanwhile Muslims are working extremely hard to cow Christians and to terrorize people with claims of Islamophobia, that will only make matters a great deal worse. And one of the things in the papers today was that civil servants have sat on this report because they're terrified of it coming into the public space in case people who are not Muslim get extremely cross by the fact that our taxes are going to support Taliban promoting organizations.
Well, it's a massive problem, isn't it? And it's quite an interesting discussion, just that from that multiculturalism perspective, because I think the majority of people want to live in peace, don't they? So they want to be welcoming of of other people, and so that we've sort of, as a country, been sold multiculturalism as the way forward, haven't we? And the Enoch Powell stuff, we haven't really seen. Well, I mean, have we? I don't know. We haven't really seen it come to fruition yet. But of course, we also know that Islam has got a jihad strategy, which is that they are that they abide by the laws of the country they're in initially, until they reach a majority position, in which case they enforce Sharia law. So it's all to come. Yeah, we've got it all to come.
We have, and one of the things we ought to allow ourselves to do is to change our position. I would like to see Islam and Christianity as moral allies against the pernicious immorality of Western culture, which is wholly depraved. And I don't see any reason why. I mean, we know perfectly well what the Islamic position is on homosexuality. The Muslims have done an extraordinarily good job at simply ducking out of the whole thing, because they know that if they get drawn in, they'll attract to themselves the anger and rage of the left, which at the moment is kept exclusively for Christians. So I'd like to see us working hand in hand with Muslims on certain moral issues in our society. I'd also like to see us recognizing that both have entirely proper claims. There's a very interesting book called the Andaluvian Paradise, the something of Andaluvian Paradise. It'll come back to me. So for a long time, the convivencia, the period in Spain where Islam ruled, has been taken in liberal circles as being a period of remarkable tolerance and fruition, academically, medically, astronomically, and so on. In actual fact, it was a period of serious brutality towards Christians. Jews occupied a different and special place at different times, but the myth of the Andalusian Paradise, I think it was. And one of the things that's happened is in academic circles is for the last 40 years, money from Saudi Arabia has been poured into academic faculties to get people to write books rewriting history on what happened in Spain, saying, in fact, if you allow the Muslims to be in charge, they will produce this wonderful paradise of cooperation and kindness. And the myth of the Andalusian Paradise exposed, the revisionist histories as they were being written, and the fact that, in fact, Islam was quite inhospitable. Now, the reason this matters is not to be rude to Islam, but to say that we have to fight to keep our culture Christian. And by fight, I meant in the same way. I didn't mean necessarily literally. We have to struggle, jihad. We have to have to struggle to keep our culture Christian. And at the moment, the churches are, like everyone else, are so afraid of Islamophobia. But actually, we owe it to our good Muslim neighbors not to let them be tarred with the brush of the more extremists. So it's Islamophobic to do nothing about it. But it's simply erupted in the press today, and it gives me the opportunity of saying, "See, I told you so," after my Herald essay.
I think what's really interesting, and I think you hit the nail on the head, with regard to the fact that we've kind of got this apathetic approach to our culture, and if we don't really value what we've got, then we allow this sort of clash to take place and it become problematic. We haven't really got an answer to Islam. That's the way that I see it. And so you've got young, idealistic and devout followers of Islam coming into our country, and our people are impressed by that. They say, that's impressive. And our young men, particularly, because it's quite masculine, are attracted to that. And the problem that I see is that we don't value our own culture. We don't value our Christian culture or see it as something positive. And so we've got no foil to Islam. And if we stood a little bit more on our ground, then we would, I think, be in a stronger position, especially when you look at what's going on in Muslim countries. Is that really what we want to see growing in our country? The things that we value about our country are Christian things, not Muslim things. And we don't necessarily have to put ourselves at odds with other people in order to assert our, what we think is a superior way of treating other people and respecting other people and life. I don't think that should necessarily make us phobic or, and that's what we do. We do here, don't we? Is that we talk about the positive things about Christianity and the way that it affects your life. And that doesn't mean that we don't love everyone else or treat them like our brothers and sisters, but it means that it's important to have that discussion and to be able to assert, what we think is important about being a human being in 2022/2023, as it soon will be.
Yeah, and what's at stake are the souls of our young people. It really matters. And you're quite right that Islam is appealing, in particular, perhaps to young men, not exclusively to young men. And you say it's masculine, and they see something in it. And what I have found when speaking with young people and young men is actually when you talk about the Catholic faith and you make it clear, and you talk about the teachings, and you talk about Christ as the perfect model of a man, that suddenly that becomes very appealing to them. One doesn't have to do down another religion only to elucidate what the truth of our own faith. Then I think young people will find it very appealing and will answer in them a deep need, that deep desire and that restlessness that they're searching for, and that they have found and are finding in Islam and other religions. But we just need to make it clear that it's
like we don't really believe in it, isn't it? That's what we keep saying. This same thing is that you know, Islam is offering definite answers to our young people. And if we haven't even got the confidence of our own beliefs, you know, then how on earth do we expect our children to you know, it just seems obvious.
It offers certainty in a world that increasingly what young people are finding is there's no certainty. Any corner you turn, you don't know what you are, you don't know who you are, you don't know how to identify, you don't know what's right to say, you don't know what's wrong to say. You've got to be careful about everything, and it's just this sort of mush of uncertainty. And so certainty and clarity and truth is appealing. So yes, it's about making that clear in our own faith. If you're happy to move on, it seems like a good moment to talk about Pope Benedict XVI, who at this time of recording is quite seriously unwell, although I hear stable at the moment. He's 95, I think, and one of the things that we expect will happen upon his death is that there will be the usual kind of narratives that were in the public square when he was appointed Pope, and the inevitable comparison between him and Francis. So what do you think, Mark? We don't know what the situation will be when this goes out, but what might you say as a reflection maybe upon the life, the contribution of Pope Benedict XVI?
Well, I think Benedict was amazing. And not just as Pope, before that, his contribution as a theologian and as a scholar and an academic, it gave you confidence in the faith. Just in, you know, he spoke to so many issues. I think one of the most important books I ever read was his Introduction to Christianity, which I think he wrote in the late 60s or the early 70s, which was I think the first academic book I picked up and actually had to get a pen out and write "wow" in the margins, you know, because it seemed to speak to so many important concerns or the gaps in my own understanding. And as Pope, I think I think the only thing you could say was obviously he was head of the CDF before he was the Pope, and everyone thought that he would be, you know, they nicknamed him God's Rottweiler. And they all thought that this is what we'd get, this sort of dogmatic, strict Pope. And what we got was a revelation of Christ in 3 volumes, you know, through his fantastic works that he published.
Yeah, it's
he's touched me in so many ways. And in contrast, I just don't know what to say. I've tried with Pope Francis, I really have, and certainly in the early days I spent a lot of time defending him, but I mean, where Ratzinger brought light, you know, I just feel like Francis has brought confusion and darkness, and you know, and I like some of the ideas broadly. I like some of the, you know, we've all got God bless you, Gavin. I think some of the ideas of going out to the peripheries, but it's like he says one thing and then he does the opposite. So I just don't know, you know.
Excuse me.
I don't know what you know. Less said, sooner mended, I think.
What's interesting about Pope Benedict is that so there are things about him that he would pay for his own meals, he would pay for things, and he was very humble. He's a real humble servant, a German shepherd, not God's Rottweiler, but it didn't fit the narrative to report these things. So I think he suffered a lot with the press and the way they portrayed him. And what's interesting when you talk about dogma is people will say, well, he was dogmatic. And I think, well, actually, if you don't care about dogma, if you don't care about doctrine, if you don't care about truth, then everything else falls away. The compassion for people, the dignity of the human person, the care for the poor, if you remove that underneath it all, then that falls away. So you have to care about that if you care about people. So it's a false dichotomy to say, well, Francis cares about people and is compassionate. This comparison, I think, is unhelpful. And even the two of them have spoken, you know, have a close relationship and have spoken fondly about one another. I think the press want to pit them one against the other, but that idea of that compassionate German shepherd. I don't know why we're calling them dogs. This is I'm just looking at my battery. If I go, Gavin, you can speak, but I need to run and get my cable, so I'll disappear.
I'd like
Gavin.
to read from a letter of Pope Benedict XVI, which he wrote in February this year, because it's very moving. Someone sent it to me this afternoon. He wrote, "Quite soon I shall find myself before the final judge of my life. Even though, as I look back on my long life, I can have a great reason for fear and trembling, I am nonetheless of good cheer. For I trust firmly that the Lord is not only the just judge, but also the friend and the brother, who himself has already suffered for my shortcomings, and is thus also my advocate, my paraclete. In the light of the hour of judgment, the grace of being a Christian becomes all the more clear to me. It grants me knowledge and indeed friendship with the judge of my life, and thus allows me to pass confidently through the dark door of death." He wrote this to the Archdiocese of Munich in February this year. I think one of the things that touched me so much was, we talk about dogma, but really it's the same reason for standing up to Islam. If you love Jesus and you adore him and you know him, nothing is too much for him. And what you read in Benedict's books is he had encountered the Jesus for whom nothing is too much, and he wrote about it with a brain and a heart that were each as large as each other. And normally you can often find people with large hearts who've got small brains, and people with large brains who've got small hearts. It's quite unusual to find somebody with a large brain and a large heart, and he was one of those unusual men who and he believed. He really, really believed. How lucky we were in John Paul II and Benedict XVI to have popes who truly believed without any equanimity. And I think I don't want to compare him with Francis, because I think we should talk about the strengths of faith, what they are, and leave the deficiencies to be. We do it by implication, not by accusation.
Yeah, I agree, but I think also it's important to stress the continuity. As much as we might criticize Francis, I think there's a temptation sometimes to play up to much, to an extent, Francis not, standing up for life, or not being pro-life in the way he speaks, or other things that, and to play down Pope Benedict's concern for social justice. In other words, it's too easy, I think, sometimes, and we can all be guilty of this, to pigeonhole them, and in that way we are undermining the church and the continuity of the church. And I remember years ago on the Big Questions being asked by Nicky Campbell, is that his name? Yeah, the guy who did he said, oh, of course Pope Francis cares about the environment. As if he's the first pope to ever care about the environment. And I said, as have all the popes before him, going back to the first pope, and obviously caring about the environment as stewards of creation, and we receive creation from God. So I agree, we don't necessarily want to get into personality differences or to compare the two men, but I think it's important to stress that there is that continuity, and that's important.
I hope so. I do think that we'll be reading Ratzinger in 100 years and getting stuff out of it. I don't think we'll be reading Laudato Si in 100 years.
No, I agree with you. I think the impact of Pope Benedict is not yet fully appreciated, but I think he's huge. He's been a huge and great gift to the church, and a very humble man, I think. And in fact, we talked about this before. What's interesting is the other thing is that people will say, and I think this will come out again when he dies, is how he wore red shoes and he wore these garments and these vestments, and wasn't he pompous and old-fashioned and traditional and conservative and stuck in the mud, when in fact what he was doing was pointing to the transcendent. We talk about immanence and transcendence, and what he's doing is saying, actually, it's not about me, the man, it's what I can do, what you're being directed to. And in fact, there's something even less humble about saying, look at me in my simple garb, and I'm paying for my own meal, and I'm living in a simple room. To say that is drawing more attention to yourself, and it's not about the trans. So it's about how you look at these things. But we know the inevitable criticism of Benedict will come, that he was all to those things.
There'll be another one along shortly.
Yeah.
Right, that's it, I think.
Thank you very much. It's very
Thank
good.
you.
There's
Excellent.
loads more stuff we could talk about.
There is loads more. I'm conscious of time, so we'll have to meet again, because even each of those things we discussed, we could delve into deeper. But if you do, please keep writing in the comments anything that you want us to address. We're not saying we have all the answers, but I think just begging the questions and trying to explore some of the things that are on your minds as well, that will no doubt be on ours. So we'll look at the comments and take from there what we can. Thank you for watching, listening, and please do continue to share and like, and a happy new year. This may reach you before New Year, or it may reach you as 2023 begins, but a happy, blessed and prosperous 23 from us. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden. Pray for Pope Benedict. God bless you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.